Many individuals have never had money and they don't need money. Therefore, we get rejected like that a lot because you know what? They don't care about that. The things they don't care about your money. They never had it and never going to have it when Frank Fritz was discovered dead on his bathroom floor, no one could have predicted what lay hidden in his garage. A secret collection worth millions, over 75 vintage motorcycles, including a one-of-a-kind 1947 Indian Chief prototype, worth $250,000 Aerosmith's Lost Tour van, a Star Wars Yoda prototype that George Lucas thought was destroyed. But the biggest shock wasn't his treasures. It was the handwritten journals revealing the dark truth about his final days, why he was really fired from American Pickers, and who was trying to steal his $6 million fortune. Frank, born in Davenport, Iowa in 1963, Fritz was not like the other children, even as a young boy. While most kids were out riding bikes or trading baseball cards, Frank was filled his room with rocks, coins, stamps, and even empty beer cans. He gathered items other kids didn't even notice his parents. Bill and Susan thought it was just a harmless habit, but Frank saw something in these forgotten objects, something worth keeping. He once said he used to collect all the staples from school papers. That's how deep it went. He even had a fascination with razor blades, which seemed strange at the time, but it showed early on that he had an eye for things that others overlooked. As he got older, Frank went to Sudalo Intermediate and then Bettendorf High School. That's where he met Mike Wolf. They were in 8th grade when they first clicked, and it didn't take long before they were out on weekends, hunting for treasures at garage sales and flea markets. The two boys were attracted to the same sorts of things: odd, dusty, forgotten objects with stories to tell. While some teachers believed Frank might go far with a conventional education, he took a different route. He didn't believe college was where he'd learn what really mattered. He thought genuine knowledge came from experience, from touching old things, learning their history, and determining what made them valuable after high school. Frank took a job as a fire inspector, covering large parts of Iowa. He stayed in that line of work for nearly 25 years, but collecting never left him. If anything, it grew as a teenager. He had already started buying motorcycles. He was just 16 when he bought a 1964 Harley Davidson for over $4,000, a huge amount. At the time, his parents were shocked, but Frank didn't see it as just a bike. It was a piece of history. He worked hard at places like Quad City Automatic Sprinkler and Coast to Coast Hardware to pay for his new passion, and eventually he had more than 100 vintage motorcycles. He even built a barn to store them all. Every year he rode out to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota and became a familiar face in the biker world. Long before he ever appeared on TV, what made Frank different wasn't just what he collected, it was how he collected. He had what he called a picker's eye. He could walk into an old barn or attic and see what others missed. He spent years exploring dusty buildings, keeping notes about where to find interesting things, and wondering about the lives of the people who once owned them. He didn't just collect objects, he collected their stories, and this approach turned him from a casual collector into someone who treated every find like a piece of history being rescued from the trash. Even in his job as a fire inspector, Frank's passion for collecting kept growing. While inspecting old buildings, he often stumbled across items that had been left behind: fire helmets, alarms, vintage gear. These weren't just forgotten tools, they were pieces of the past, and Frank knew how to spot them. His inspections turned into something more. They were treasure hunts concealed behind safety reports and fire codes. Over time, this odd mix of jobs, inspector by day, picker by heart, shaped the expert he would become. His work as an inspector honed his attention to detail. He learned to read a building and see what others missed. That same skill helped him later when he walked into antique shops or storage sheds looking for hidden gems. He didn't just guess, he had a system. Years of scanning walls and checking for hazards had trained him to spot what others missed. That edge would later serve him well on American Pickers when he was sifting through mountains of junk for something truly valuable. There was one small moment that changed everything. Frank bought an old item for just $15, something simple, and later sold it for $475. That sale stuck with him. It wasn't just the profit, though that was impressive. It was the realization that his knowledge had value. He had spent years studying these objects, and now it was paying off. That one deal showed him that his passion could become a real business. From then on, he started looking at collecting differently, not just as a hobby, but as a way to build something bigger in 2002. Frank decided to take the leap. He retired from fire inspection and opened a shop called Frank's Finds in Savannah, Illinois. It was more than a store. It felt like a little museum filled with firefighting gear, antique tools and items most people had forgotten even existed. The building itself had history. It was an old opera house with a bar attached, and walking inside felt like stepping into another time. Some guests claimed it looked dark and smelled musty, but to Frank, that was part of the appeal. This was his world, raw, real, and full of character. Over the years, the store drew collectors and inquisitive travelers. People would come just to see the unusual and amazing things on display. Not everyone liked the arrangement. Some found it difficult to navigate, but those who got what Frank was about saw the worth in it. The store and everything in it became the basis for his next chapter. Frank was ready when television came calling. He didn't have to act. All he had to do was be himself. The guy who saw treasure where others saw trash, and who never stopped believing that every object had a story worth telling. Already with a camera in hand, Mike Wolfe was pursuing ancient treasures. Around 2002, he began recording his exploits concurrently with his longtime buddy Frank Fritz, who had just quit his steady fire inspector job and opened his own antique store in Savannah, Illinois. Frank was content operating his store stocked with vintage motorcycles, oil cans, and ancient toys. He wasn't looking to hit the road, but Mike had a vision. He believed their picking trips could be something bigger, and he spent months trying to convince Frank to join him. Frank wasn't sure he liked the store. It was steady, it was his. But then one day something changed. Frank bought a small badge from a fraternal group for $115. It didn't look like much later. He sold it for $1,450. That one moment gave him a rush, a kind of gambler's high, as he called it, that feeling. Plus Mike's constant pushing finally convinced Frank to give it a shot. He shut his doors, grabbed his gear, and joined Mike on the road. Those first trips shot on the fly would eventually become the raw material capturing the attention of TV producers when American Pickers debuted in January 2010. Everything changed. Frank went from being a quiet shop owner to someone millions of people watched every week. The first episode drew in more than 3 million viewers. One of the biggest debuts in History Channel's history, Frank, with his beard-stocky build and calm way of speaking, stood in perfect contrast to Mike's high-energy personality. People loved him for it. In no time, fans were lining up just to see them in person. That October, they visited the California Surf Museum, and a huge crowd gathered outside. Frank looked confused and asked, "What are all these people doing here?" But he then remained and signed autographs until there were no more to sign. Just 8 months after the show started, one of their episodes reached 5.3 million viewers. Frank had become a star. Mike sought vintage bikes and Volkswagens, while Frank searched toys, oil cans, and motorbike souvenirs. When they combed through Mario's main property, it was clear Mike took the motorcycle items while Frank took the gas station signs. They complemented one another like puzzle pieces. Mike once referred to Frank as a dreamer, sensitive, humorous, and contemplative. Fans recognized that as well and appreciated that unusual pair dynamic. Some identified with Frank's meticulous approach. Others connected more to Mike's quick speed. That blend made the performance relevant. Long before the show, Frank developed a passion for motorcycles as a teenager. He purchased a 1964 Harley-Davidson that likely worried his parents. It was the first of many over the years. He amassed a collection of roughly 35 vintage motorcycles, kept in a barn that seemed more like a museum. He owned uncommon Indian motorcycles, including a 1938 four-cylinder model he discovered in a barn in Philadelphia. There were British bikes as well, including Vincent BSAV Victory. One of his most valued items was the Von Dutch XAVW, a 1942 Harley frame driven by a Volkswagen engine and custom painted by Von Dutch himself. Frank had seen it in a magazine decades previously and was shocked to find it at a yard sale. Like many others in his collection, that bike told a narrative, and in 2013, Frank decided to share what he knew. He authored a book titled How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, not only for experts but also for anyone who loved motorcycles or wanted to start collecting. The book was packed with advice, anecdotes, and images from his own discoveries. He detailed how to identify a good bargain, how to negotiate, and what to seek in a hidden gem. Just like on TV, his approach was straightforward, humorous, and clear. For Frank, the book was a means to pass down all he had acquired over the years. He wanted people to grasp the past of the machines and experience the same excitement he had when resurrecting one. Frank's past life as a fire inspector influenced yet another of his interests. After 25 years of building inspections, he had access to locations most collectors never see. Abandoned firehouses, derelict stations, obsolete equipment. It was all there for someone who knew where to look. He began collecting it all: brass extinguishers, antique alarm systems, leather hats. Even on American pickers, you could see his face light up when they found something fire-related. It wasn't just a category to him, it was personal. What set Frank unique was his perspective on collecting. He didn't just see objects, he saw stories. Every item carried a memory of a time, a location, or a person. He often spent more time discussing the item's history with the seller than negotiating the price. He particularly valued items that revealed how Americans once lived: old tools, forgotten products, unusual toys. He treated war memorabilia with great respect, sometimes donating items to museums linked to fallen soldiers. That was Frank. He thought these tales should be preserved rather than buried. Frank Fritz spent most of his life battling something most people never saw for more than 36 years. He lived with Crohn's disease, a painful and exhausting condition that made everyday life difficult, especially when filming American pickers. His close friend once said Frank had been dealing with it since he was about 25 or 30 years old. He hid it well, pushing through the pain while millions watched him on TV, never knowing what he was going through. Things improved when he quit drinking and focused on getting sober, but years of stress and illness had already taken a toll. His health kept getting worse, and in the end, it was just too much for his body to handle when he died at 60. Many people didn't realize just how much he had been suffering behind the scenes. Things started spilling into the public eye. In 2017, Frank had been driving on the wrong side of the road. When the police stopped him, he told them he had been drinking and had taken Xanax, which he said was prescribed for his anxiety. He failed the sobriety test and was charged with